I remember it was a day I woke up and I was like, dude, I just don't even want to be in existence anymore, if I'm being honest. And I remember I just went through that day and felt very laissez-faire about everything. I was like, it's not going to matter. I won't exist tomorrow. You know what I mean? And dude, it was late at night. I just got done smoking with some friends of mine. And I remember I was sitting in the car. It was cold like it is now, but it was a little bit more snowy. And it was like, I drove all the way downtown because we have like this canal situation like in Indy. That's kind of like one of our biggest attractions. And I remember I was sitting there, it was completely empty. It was just myself. And it was like, I was just sitting there smoking by myself and I was thinking like, is this it? You know what I mean? I'm like, is this the extent of what my capabilities are? Like this internal voice has been telling me that I'm capable of doing other things, but my external reality was not reflecting that whatsoever. Come to find out later on it was because of where my mind was at. But I kind of just got tired of thinking that way. Kind of got tired of existing in that headspace. I was like, this can't be the end all be all. I was like, I'm 19 years old. This is supposed to be the very beginning of my life.
Mm.
Do I want to be living like this at 60, 70, 80? If I even make it that far? Because truthfully, at that time, I didn't think I was going to make it past like 21, 22. My life was just in a destructive spiral like that I thought that was the limit. So I really just kind of took a shot in the dark the same way I took a shot in the dark with music, because the funny thing is, as all of this is happening, I'm like starting to kind of figure out my voice in the beginning parts of my music career. And I had people around me who were kind of like, look, dude, if nothing else, try this. And it felt like, you know what, the convergence of let's try something different and music being a reality kind of all came together and created this perfect storm of let's try. That's all we can do is try. I don't know where it's going to lead, but it's got to be better than this. It's got to be better than where my head's at. It's got to be better than how I feel about myself and how I view the world. So it's let's just try it. Let's just try it. And that's pretty much how we got here. Just a complete, you know, a complete just jump off the cliff. That's how we're here. And it's something, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but it's relevant. It's something that I talk about like in the group a lot when someone's like, well, I'm not really sure if I should. I was like, look, if I wasn't in that parking lot thinking about doing something to myself that would have taken me off this earth, and if I didn't take that shot in the dark, I wouldn't be here. Like, you really have no clue where one small shot in the dark decision can take you. So if you almost feel like, wow, should I start that business or should I go talk to that person? Do it. Just do it. Because ultimately, what do you have to lose? You know what I mean? It's like it either goes really well and your whole life changes, or it doesn't go well and you have a lesson, but you want to know something, you're farther than where you were. And that's all you can really ask for. Either way, you took a step forward. So just try it.
Hello, friends. In this episode, I sit down with Bayem. Bayem is an indie pop artist based in Indianapolis. He has millions of streams. His music has been featured on the Kardashians, and he is an incredibly deep thinker. In this episode, we got into his journey from starting in this position of nihilism to eventually becoming a successful pop musician, growing up having a very nihilistic view with very little prospects to becoming a successful musician. Bayem's journey is one that honestly is inspiring and reminds us what human potential is capable of and what opportunities might lie right around the corner. Additionally, in this episode, we talked about Bayem's philosophy, where he gets his inspiration for his music, the underlying humanity that connects us all, and Bayem joining 12 steps and how that has profoundly shifted his mindset and attitude. Additionally, what those mindsets and attitudes are. What were those mindset shifts that led Bayem from this nihilistic place to having a positive outlook where he is trying to create connection? And towards the end, we talk about race in America and intergenerational trauma. Fascinating conversation. Definitely stick around for it. And it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful episode. You're listening to the Gabi Kind of Podcast, the official podcast of the Men's Therapy Studio. I'm Gabi. I hope you enjoy. Vim, how you doing, man?
I'm doing very well. How you doing?
I'm doing good. First of all, I love that you're an artist and that you wanted to come on the podcast and have a discussion. And that's something that really fascinates me.
Hmm.
And I'm just really impressed. I've been checking out some of your music, and it's a real vibe. And I'm curious, like, what inspires you and what helps you to create your music and where it comes from for you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the kind words and thank you for having me on. Honestly, if I had to break down like inspiration, I would say that in a lot of ways it kind of just comes. You know what I mean? I know that sounds almost very like I wouldn't say eccentric, but it kind of sounds a little out there. I feel like I heard someone say it really well. They're like, the song is already out there. You just have to like
Mm.
open yourself like mentally, spiritually to receive it. And that's kind of how I like to operate when it comes to writing songs, is just getting into the habit of, okay, I'm here today for X number of time until something hits me, and then basically just follow that stream of consciousness as it comes. Because what's funny about it is it almost feels it feels a lot like what I've heard people talk what I've heard people say, like super spiritual, like super enlightening experiences feel like. It's like the song idea is just there and it's coming and it's just hitting you. And then there comes a point where it's like, you know what? This is enough for today. And I'll leave it until it's time to pick this back up again. So that's pretty much how it happens.
Mm. Wow. So it kind of feels like it already exists and you're just pulling it from somewhere.
100%.
Can I share an anecdote?
Please.
Yeah. So are you familiar with Plato, the philosopher?
Of course.
So he had this interesting, I'm going to probably botch it a little bit, but he had this interesting theory called the world of forms. And
Mhm.
just to describe it briefly with this question here, do you believe that math was discovered or created?
I think it was discovered.
Right. So math is this completely abstract idea, right? Like, it doesn't
Mhm.
exist. You can't see it in the world, but you could think
Mhm.
about it and understand that the rules just, it makes sense and it's there and it reflects reality somehow.
Mhm.
And it's totally abstract, right? Like, it's not physical at all. And what's fascinating is that I'm not sure if that's like a proof for Plato or just one of his like I don't know, like a result of this. But one of the things that Plato made some type of analogy of is he created this thing called the world of forms, where these things exist perfectly in the abstract.
Mhm.
And I think I've heard a lot of people say this concept of like the music just exists somewhere and you're kind of tapping into that stream. I think a lot of that comes from that idea that Plato talks about, where it's like there's this abstract reality where like music comes from and beauty comes from, these like perfect things. And if we like, we can somehow tap into that and get into that. And it's fascinating because it's like all these arts and math, they're like, it feels like there's something that connects us and connects us all. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts if you've ever heard that before and like where your thoughts on that might be.
I haven't heard specifically about that idea, but I definitely agree. I agree that like it almost feels a lot of the time like we as human beings we're kind of just loaded into like some type of game world and we're just
Mm,
figuring it out as we go along. I mean, if you think about like scientific research, all we're doing is spending so much money to figure out a plane of existence that we've existed on for millions of years at this point.
mm,
And I feel like, you know, art is one way that comes out, over time, we've had instances where we kind of, through different means, find ourselves mentally or spiritually existing in two places at one time. One of those places being here and the other being whatever. The moment we discover what that other is the moment that I think human beings just pretty much evolve so far past where we're currently at. But I think with where we're at right now, I think that it's interesting. I think not only art comes from whatever dimension that is. I think that connection with other people, because there's been
mm,
so many times in my life up to this point where I've met somebody that I know for a fact I've never met them in person, never met them on this physical plane, but there's a sense of like deep familiarity there that almost feels like unexplainable. One of my closest friends, he's an artist as well. He goes by the name 1996 Montana. We talk about all the time. The first time I met him, I knew for a fact I had never met him in person, but I pulled up to his house to work on music, and it was like he was somebody that I grew up with. It was just an instant, hey, we're
mm,
cool. And there's parts of that could be described as, oh yeah, maybe your personality traits just, just melded that way. But I don't know. There's something about it that just felt very otherworldly. So I definitely have a lot of respect for that idea that we're basically just existing here and we have no idea what's going on past us, and all we're trying to do is figure out bits and pieces of what's past us so that we can, like, almost impose that information on our current state.
Dude, that's so deep. And as you were saying that, I get a little bit of that vibe here now that like there's something deeper that seems to connect us. Like we've never met and we were chatting a little bit before this, but like I get this vibe of like, yeah, I'm vibing with you on a certain level that like, maybe is coming from somewhere else. And that idea, it seems like it's not really in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of reduce everything to what we can make money out of or like material or things that we could sense, and there's a certain amazement to that, like we can be so productive, but there's also like um this like nothing seems sacred or deep, and that's also a problem in our culture. So I'm curious to hear like how do you find that to influence how you maybe create art or like interact with the world, and like maybe what can be done to open people's eyes to this
Mm-hmm.
other kind of space where like things are deeper than it seems.
It's interesting you bring that up. I just spent the past weekend with my girlfriend. Her parents have like a little lake house up in northern Indiana. It's about like 2 hours away from where we're at, and we were talking about how our modern world is very based around consumerism. You know what I mean? And we were talking about how, obviously way back in the day with like Native Americans, and then even in my culture, my maternal grandfather was from Cameroon. He's passed, rest in peace to him. But he talked a lot about how you know, their belief systems were so tied to the earth that they lived around. You know what I mean? Their immediate environment, that because they had such a respect for it, they developed a deep appreciation for life and everything that they got from it. You know what I mean? Like, wow, the ground has sprouted food for us to eat. There's water for us to drink that's clean, or that we can clean and consume. And I think, as much as I love new ideas, as much as I love the fact that we are progressing at such a fast rate. I mean, when I was a kid, we still had the little VHS tapes. You know what I mean? You had to press rewind, and now at the click of a button, you can take any movie from my childhood and pretty much put it on the screen and watch it as many times as you want, as long as you're paying the subscription fee for it. So I love that. I love the fact that we're moving towards, a state of tech where, you know, difficulty in health and all these types of things can be pretty much minimized. But I do think a lot of those old school ideologies about connecting with nature, you know what I mean? Like grounding techniques, getting outside when it's warm, because it's way too cold to do it right now. Getting outside when it's warm,
Yeah.
barefoot, and just kind of taking a second to breathe. I think it's so important. And
Mm.
I've noticed it's helped my own creative process, because I feel like as I've done the work through, a 12-step program that I'm in, and then even just being, blessed to be surrounded by a lot of people who think deep, deeper than past what we want to eat today. Um, I've come to realize that the more I understand myself, the more I understand other people, and that we're all
Mm.
really not that different. I mean, even when we were talking briefly before we started, it was like within a 5 minute conversation, we already found some like commonalities between us. You know what I mean? Have never met each other. We live in very different worlds. You know what I mean? But there's already things that connect us. And I think that as time goes on, my goal is to continue to, form a deeper understanding of my own humanity, because I found no matter where we go, there's people that we can really connect with. We have things in common with them. And I think that the key to almost a more open and healthy world is understanding that, yeah, there may be small things that differentiate us, but we're all pretty much the same. We have the same desires. We're all human beings.
Wow. Yeah. I'm so curious how you get deeper into that level. And I feel like when I turn on the news, and this is obviously just, maybe my own confirmation biases, but
Mm-hmm.
it seems like the world is trying to make us feel that we're more different than we are, and that
Mm-hmm.
there's different motivations. And to some degree, I'm sure like there are differences, but like at the deep down, we're all human beings and we're all connected. And it's like there's just almost like a cultural push not to see that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious like where that comes from. Is that like fear? Is that like I don't know if you would have insight on this, but I am curious, maybe like what can we do to dig the layers back and help people see that, hey, we're all more similar than we are, and like, yeah, like make a cultural push for that, I guess.
Honestly, I think it comes from the top, and what I mean by that is like it's easier to control people if I feel like if I instill fear in them. You know what I mean?
Mm.
If a
Yeah.
person is afraid, they're not going to be as open. They're basically going to look to whoever's given them that information and go, okay, what do I do next? I don't want to feel whatever pain you're telling me is being forecasted in my future. How can I avoid that? And I think it's already started. I think it's already started, especially like during the pandemic. I know for me, I used to watch the news all the time. I had the Citizen app and whatnot, but there was probably like a 2 month after like a month or two, I was like, you know what, man, I kind of don't want to know all that. Truthfully, you know what I mean? I kind of don't want to know all that. It's freaking me out. It's making me like afraid. And I noticed when I started to take a step back from that, I noticed that there was a lot of people around who almost started to understand what the news actually is. It's really just like a way to keep everybody afraid. Obviously, the goal is to inform people. You know what I mean? People need to know information that's factual and information that's going to help them like move throughout their day to day life. But I think in a lot of ways, the way that is currently structured is meant to separate us because we all realize how similar we are. Then we'll actually start moving in a direction that makes sense for all of humanity. And those those paths are normally not the most profitable in the short term. They're normally not the easiest in the short term. So I think because our focus is so heavy on like, all right, how do we make a buck out of people? How do I make money off of you? How do you make money off of me? Our focus is basically there. And that's a short
Yeah.
term hit. We're not building anything for the long term. Uh, so yeah, that's really all I have on that.
Dude, that's so profound. That's so profound. So,
Bro.
what do you see as art's role in connecting people, or in maybe calling out these? Can I share another anecdote?
Please, please.
Yeah, you ever uh, read or listen to the book Fahrenheit 451?
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I hated it in high school, but then later as an adult, I I listened to it on Audible, and I was like, it really moved me. It's a
Yeah.
weird book, but because it's written kind of like almost it's almost like a dream. Like some
Mm-hmm.
things like don't exactly make sense or connect, but it's this like dystopian book. And what fascinates me is like people in this book, they're kept intentionally mindless. They're not allowed to read any books. They're not allowed to engage with ideas deeply. Otherwise, like the state kind of takes them away. And it's so funny kind of listening to that and then reflecting on our current culture, where I feel like I genuinely feel like the amount of times I hear somebody saying like, "Oh, I'm gonna get canceled if I say this or something," like, and it's not just on the right side, it's on the left side also. And
Yeah.
it's not even about politics, but just in general, like people feel so held back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me a little scared. Like, where is our culture heading if this is kind of like the mindset that people have? And I'm curious, like you're somebody, you've taken your art and you created art, and I want to kind of ask you about that, because I feel like from my experience, I'm an amateur musician
Mm-hmm.
in just piano and guitar. I play for my family. I'll like write a song every once in a while and like play for them.
Yeah.
But and then also even more backstory, I used to work in a school,
Yeah.
and I would try to teach the kids. Like I had a music period that I would take a few kids that were interested and teach them some piano and guitar. And one of the things that would happen very often is they would just be like, "Oh, I suck. I'm so bad." And I would tell them all the time, like, "No, you just started. You have to give
Mm-hmm.
yourself grace. You have to know, like, to learn the process. And something might sound bad in the beginning, but then you work on it, you get some feedback, and next thing you know, you work on it in a few weeks, a month or whatever. A month's kind of long, but it'll
Yeah.
sound pretty good."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also connected to like our culture. We're afraid to say our ideas, we're afraid to say our pushback, and we're afraid to put our art out. I'm just wondering, like, what to you gives you the guts and gives you that the confidence to put your art out and not be afraid of the backlash.
Honestly, going back a little bit, I have a little backstory. So when I started like putting music out, that was about I put my first song out about 10 years ago now, and honestly, at that time, I was in a very strange headspace. You know, grew up going to public school. We had a lot of like, you know, difficulties growing up, especially financially. I think a period of time that hasn't been talked about heavily now, but probably will be by scholars like 20, 30 years from now is, you know, the generation of kids that grew up immediately after, before, or sometime in the middle of that '07 housing crisis. Because I know for myself and for a lot of other people that I grew up around, times were tough. You know what I mean? Money wasn't stretching the way it was normally, or that it had probably 5, 6 years before that. And I reached a place at the end of high school where my life was kind of in a state of disarray. You know what I mean? I was kind of trying to keep it together the best I could, but it was just kind of on the rocks. And I almost felt like I didn't have anything else to lose. You know what I mean? I was like, you know what? This is the way I'm genuinely feeling. I don't know how to put it into words and have a conversation with someone one on one about this being the way that I was feeling. And even the way that like therapy and stuff is set up when you're, at least at the time, I don't know how it is now, but under 18, if it's anything past a certain point, they have to bring your parents in. And I was like, music was really my place where it was like, I can say whatever I want, whenever I want, freely put it out there. And if someone looks too deeply into it, I can just say, hey, this is just me being creative. This is not real at all, even if it may be. It was just therapy, you know what I mean? And now at this point, I've been thinking about this a lot recently. I feel like music has always been one of the at least in modern times, one of the greatest vehicles of inspiring deeper thought. And I've been trying to think
Mm,
about how can I do that within my own music and even in conversations, because I think the music is an introduction, but how we continue that conversation on is really important. It's similar to
mm,
introducing an idea to someone and then leaving. It's like, well, if I introduce just a basic idea, they can go any direction with it. If I give my own context and my own thought, maybe that sends them on a different trajectory of like, wow, I never saw it that way. And I think the more conversations we have like that, whether it's okay, I put a song out and it inspires conversation, or conversations like these, the more we'll move towards a place of deeper understanding as a culture. Because now, instead of me hearing what you think through the news, I'm hearing it straight from you. And I'm like, wait a minute, what they're saying and what you're saying are two different things. I see how they got to there, but I understand you on a deeper level because you've told it to me directly. You know what I mean? So
mm,
I think art is one of those things, like a lot of different things, people who are thought leaders, you know what I mean? Like bell hooks. Um, I think it's always been a vehicle to really just a conversation. You know what I mean? So
mm.
how are we starting that conversation? You know?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think it's something people don't necessarily realize is that artists are thought leaders. Like their
Hmm.
art, if it's meaningful, it's a statement. It's saying
Hmm.
something. You mentioned also the 12-step program. I don't know
Yeah,
if you want to go back and say more on that.
of course, dude. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, truthfully, man, my entire upbringing, like, it was weird. I felt like I was living two separate lives at the same time. At school, I'm like trying my best. I was never the best at school, if I'm being honest. From
Yeah.
a young age, I kind of felt like it was a little bit pointless. And I'm not saying that
Mm,
it is pointless, but for me, it felt very repetitive. I'm like, okay, you're giving me the
mm,
work. I do the work. I turn it in. I get a grade. Feels very arbitrary. You know what I mean? And I was kind of
yeah.
always attracted to stuff like art that felt a little bit more open ended. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I had some traumatic things happen as I was growing up. You know what I mean? And they all kind of came to a head when I was 17. I got put in a little at risk teen like center, and that was really when a lot of my understanding of the therapeutic process started to kind of like kick on. And so that basically started the ball rolling on me asking some deeper questions about myself, like, okay, where do I want to go, and what are some like emotional habits that I can develop now that'll get me there. And I really was just
Mm,
kind of searching for those answers. And it was interesting, this woman that I dated a couple of years ago, well, actually it's been more than a couple of years ago now. I keep forgetting it's 2025. I'm like, 2020 was last year. No, it was 5 years
yeah.
ago.
Right.
um
Yeah, dude.
yeah, but
One big blur since COVID.
dude, for real, like, thought it was gonna be a year, ended up being like 2 or 3, but that's neither
Mm,
here nor there. But this woman that I dated, her father is like a psychologist, you know what I mean? And he was telling me about, yeah, one of my clients had fought through addiction, this, and the third. And I never really had anything with addiction. I just had a lot of like trauma that I need to like work through. And he was like, yeah, he started a program where you can like work through those types of things and work with him one on one. And it's a program called Broken to Blessing. And so
Mm.
basically, at first, I was very hesitant to the idea because even though I put music out about a lot of the ways that I was feeling, it was separate from me. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, I'm able to like put this music out and sure it's under my name, but it's completely separate from me. Someone can hear what I'm saying directly from me, but not directly from me, if that makes any sense. And so in the beginning, I was kind of like, yeah, I don't know about this 12-step stuff, this and the third. But then there was almost a moment of like, you know what? Let me open myself up and see how deep I can get into this. And that was 3 years ago. 3 years ago now. I've gone through all the 12 steps, and then now I help sponsor other people. And yeah, beginning of last year, they elected me to be the president of the board, kind of help guide the future of the program. And it's been awesome. Honestly, it's really doubled down on the idea in my life that like service is the ultimate way to like find fulfillment. Like what we do for ourselves, awesome, cool, great, but how are we pouring into other people? Because that's where the true happiness lies. You know what I mean?
Wow. This feeling of if you could help somebody else, that fulfills you.
100%.
That's so powerful. Obviously, talk about whatever you feel comfortable with, but
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, how do you feel that those traumas, maybe in hindsight, like, how do you feel those traumas affected you, like, from your day to day? How did that affect your mental state and maybe things you were doing at that time?
Honestly, when I look back to who I was when I was like growing up, which is very weird to say because you're kind of just this ever changing ball of clay. Um, I think where my head was at was I kind of just didn't care. You know what I mean? My level of self-value didn't really exist. You know what I mean? I was kind of whatever teachers told me I was, sports coaches told me that I was. And it was weird. Internally, I always had the desire to like try and uh do bigger things and do things I felt were more meaningful, but there was almost something within myself that told me that I wasn't worthy of doing that. Like, why should I do that? My words don't have meaning. Who would listen? You know, and I think it wasn't until becoming an adult and gaining more life experience, and especially through this 12 step, that I kind of came to realize, you know what? It doesn't matter if everyone's listening, saying it's what's most important, because
Mhm.
eventually someone will listen and it may mean something to them. Um, I've just been very fortunate up to this point that a lot of people have listened, but that was never the intent. It was basically just let me say these things out into a void, and hopefully someone will listen and be like, you know what, I relate to that. And even if that's where the conversation stopped, if they just went, you know what, I relate to that, and just kind of moved on with life, that was perfect. But I just had to get it out. And yeah, I look at myself growing up and I'm like, if there's one thing I had to water it down to, I just kind of felt a little invisible, if I'm being honest, you know, because maybe you can relate to this. Like, I feel like when parents are going through financial hardship, as much as they want to be present for their kids and they work hard to be present for their kids, the looming sense of if I don't pay for this, we're going to go without this kind of supersedes that. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so it was never communicated to me like this. I love my parents. It was never communicated to me like this, but I almost felt like what I'm going through doesn't really matter right now because we're just trying to keep the heat on. We're just trying to have food in the cabinet. You know what I mean? There's
Mhm.
bigger
Mhm.
things than my emotional state. And the problem was as time went on and I didn't talk to people about it, it just kind of piled up and piled up until it just like it starts as, yeah, I don't feel like going to class today, so I just leave. And then that becomes a habit. I mean, my senior year of high school, I missed 256 periods of class. I was never there. You know what I mean? And then it's like, yeah, let me hang out with these people. And then before you know it, you're like, crap, I've been putting this at risk center with all these other people who I look at and I'm like, I'm nothing like these people. But I'm like, wait a minute. If I was nothing like these people, I wouldn't be here. So it inspired the question of what am I really doing? You know what I mean?
Wow. Wow, that's so insightful, and to understand. And what's so interesting, what I find is so fascinating is like how it wasn't intentional.
Hmm.
The your parents were just trying to survive and put food on the table, but like
Hmm.
through doing that, you've internalized that your feelings and your thoughts don't matter. And it's like that's so profound and so easy to overlook.
Hmm. Because I think too, like, what's interesting is because I've had a lot of conversations with my dad about this. He grew up in a very similar way. You know what I mean? Where it's like financial struggle, single mom, three kids, like working three jobs, and it's. I feel like it's helped me understand generational trauma more because I this could
Mm.
totally be nonsense. You know, internet is filled with a lot of pseudoscience, but I remember reading somewhere that our life experiences get imprinted onto our DNA. You know what I mean? So I was wondering how much of what I was feeling was because of the moment and how much of that I adopted from him. How much of it was
Mm.
passed down to me, feeling like, there's almost this idea, and I think it's a countrywide thing, but I mean, I see it a lot in the Midwest and Indiana just because that's where I'm at. Like, it's a very blue collar place, a lot of people working factory jobs, hard manual labor jobs, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for 40 years. There's almost this mentality of like, well, I push through it. I don't talk about it. I just push through it. I just kind of like, you know, so and so passed away. That's okay. I go to the wake and I go to work the next day. You know what? There isn't really. I almost had to like fight against my own conditioning to go. Let's take a second and talk about this because the prevailing thought is, well, no matter what happens, you just keep pressing on, even if that's. I mean, a car can only drive with broken axles for so long before you're just on the side of the road with the hazard lights on. You know what I mean? So the conversation had to be had at some point, and I'm glad it happened earlier in life rather than later. Because now, if it would have happened later, then it's like not only am I working through that, but I'm also working through and finding acceptance for, wow, this caused so many avoidable conflicts in my life that I have to like forgive myself for. You know what I'm saying?
Wow. How did you develop this insight? Like what helped you see the pattern in your life and break free from it?
Honestly, man, I feel like there was probably like a 10-year period between the age of like 7 and 17 where the majority of the time that I woke up and went to sleep, I was like, man, why am I even here? And it's interesting
Mm.
because that corresponds perfectly with the time. Like, my dad used to work for this company called Daimler Chrysler in Indiana at the time. If you didn't go to college, one of the best ways to make a lot of money was get into skilled trades, become an electrician, work at one of the auto manufacturers. I mean, I'm talking about
Mm.
people 3, 4 years out of high school making six figures. I mean, you work for those six figures. It's not like you're just in there
Yeah.
chilling, drinking coffee. You're in there working. But so that's what he did. I mean, he went to the military and then came back and became an electrician. But in '05, it was the beginning of that. Okay, we're sending manufacturing to other places. And so his plant
Mm.
closed down. And as that closed down, his real estate business, he had trusted some people in our family to do good work, didn't happen. So everything kind of just collapsed at the same time. And so that was kind of when a lot of those, hey, we got to just keep it together. That's when the mentality shifted. And so I think where a lot of the insight came from was there was a point where I was 18 or 19 and I had basically existed in that headspace for so long, had seen so much negativity for so long that I almost attributed it to a higher power. Where the idea just came in of like, you've been thinking negative for so long and you've been experiencing and seeing negative. What if you tried positive? Just what if you tried it? You know what I mean? Just,
Yeah.
I don't know, gratitude or something. I don't even know where to begin. You're so deep in thinking that way that you don't know what the other side looks like. But what if you tried it? And so just tried it, you know what I mean? And then it was almost like a boulder rolling down a hill. It just kept building momentum. I noticed that like me thinking more positively led to me changing my diet and changing the way that I interacted with people to this point now, 10 years on, where I'm like, wow, I totally understand where my head was at, totally understand who I was as a person, but I can't relate to that at all anymore. It almost feels like that was an entirely different human being. But it was a process. I think if there's anyone out there who's trying to like steer their life in a different direction, all I would say is like it is a process because it took time for you to develop that pattern of thinking that is getting you all these negative results. It's going to take time to go in the opposite direction. It's going to be like learning a new language.
Mm.
And I think as time went on, the more dedicated I became to like, hey, I want to work past this. I want to work past this, and I can work past this. Um, it became easier. You know what I mean? And especially now being at a place where I can have these conversations with other people in like our group and even people who are interested in joining the group and see that, wow, this person's going through the same thing. I can pour into them by like recounting my own experiences. So that's kind of how it all started.
Dude, that's so profound. Something that really struck me is you were saying from the ages of 7 to 17, you were asking, why are you here?
Mm-hmm.
That's a long time.
It is. It is. And
yeah.
What's up?
Yeah, I'm curious, like what answers were coming up? What were you feeling? You know?
Honestly, for a long time, it was like, I'm not here for a reason. I was very nihilistic before I even knew what nihilism was. And it's interesting because I always said 7 to 17, but it wasn't until I sat back one day and thought about it. I'm like, those are pretty much your developmental years. You know, I mean, I mean, you know, you're a therapist. Like, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but like the books on like childhood development and all that stuff, like, at least to my understanding, 7 to 17, I mean, that's where you become a human being. Before that, you're kind of just your little NPC walking around. You know what I mean? You like apple juice because that's what's in front of you. You like applesauce because that's what's in front of you. But honestly, I feel like the majority of the answers that were coming back was like, I'm not here for a reason, and that because of that, I started operating that way. Like, oh, you know, teacher said, hey, you're not fulfilling your potential. Well, of course not. I'm not. There's no potential to fulfill. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so in a lot of ways, I started kind of just hanging with a lot of people who thought the same way. But what's funny about it is I look back and they felt the same way, but also felt the same way. And like, not that they thought, oh, I'm worth nothing and that's it. It was like, I'm worth nothing, but somewhere internally, I know I want to do something more. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was some type of calling on the inside.
Yeah, it was a little voice. It was a little voice. Needed a boom mic, needed, you know, something. But it was like, hey, because I think about some of the decisions that friends of mine that I was hanging around with at the time. I think about some of the decisions that we made, and although they were reckless, they weren't as reckless as a person who didn't care about themselves would make. You know what I mean? It was like reckless enough to be like, wow, I'm pushing into like dangerous territory, but not like, oh, I really don't care. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so then you mentioned there was this shift where there was almost like something from a higher power coming to you and being like, hey, just try something else. What was that? What caused that shift for you?
Real talk, man. I remember it was a day I woke up and I was like, dude, I just don't even want to be in existence anymore, if I'm being honest. And I remember I just went through that day and felt very laissez-faire about everything. I was like, it's not going to matter. I won't exist tomorrow. You know what I mean? And dude, it was late at night. I just got done smoking with some friends of mine. And I remember I was sitting in the car. It was cold like it is now, but it was a little bit more snowy. And it was like, I drove all the way downtown because we have like this canal situation like in Indy. That's kind of like one of our biggest attractions. And I remember I was sitting there. It was completely empty. It was just myself. And it was like, I was just sitting there smoking by myself. And I was thinking like, is this it? You know what I mean? I'm like, is this the extent of what my capabilities are? Like, this internal voice has been telling me that I'm capable of doing other things, but my external reality was not reflecting that whatsoever. Come to find out later on, it was because of where my mind was at. But I kind of just got tired of thinking that way. Kind of got tired of existing in that headspace. I was like, this can't be the end all be all. I was like, I'm 19 years old. This is supposed to be the very beginning of my life. Do I want to be living like this at 60? 70, 80, if I even make it that far. Because truthfully, at that time, I didn't think I was going to make it past like 21, 22. My life was just in a destructive spiral like that I thought that was the limit. So I really just kind of took a shot in the dark the same way I took a shot in the dark with music, because the funny thing is, as all of this is happening, I'm like starting to kind of figure out my voice in the beginning parts of my music career. And I had people around me who were kind of like, look, dude, if nothing else, try this. And it felt like, you know what, the convergence of let's try something different and music being a reality kind of all came together and created this perfect storm of let's try. That's all we can do is try. I don't know where it's going to lead, but it's got to be better than this. It's got to be better than where my head's at. It's got to be better than how I feel about myself and how I view the world. So let's just try it. Let's just try it. And that's pretty much how we got here. Just a complete, you know, a complete just jump off the cliff. That's how we're here. And it's something, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but it's relevant. It's something that I talk about like in the group a lot when someone's like, well, I'm not really sure if I should. I was like, look, if I wasn't in that parking lot thinking about doing something to myself that would have taken me off this earth, and if I didn't take that shot in the dark, I wouldn't be here. Like, you really have no clue where one small shot in the dark decision can take you. So if you almost feel like, wow, should I start that business or should I go talk to that person? Do it. Just do it. Because ultimately, what do you have to lose? You know what I mean? It's like, it either goes really well and your whole life changes, or it doesn't go well and you have a lesson, but you want to know something, you're farther than where you were. And that's all you can really ask for. Either way, you took a step forward. So just try it. You know?
That's such good advice. And I love how that also, it honestly also could come from nihilism. Comes from
Oh,
like, you have
100%.
nothing to lose anyways, you know? And
Exactly.
it's maybe like a positive spin on it.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So I'm curious though, you're doing 12 steps. 12 steps is usually for addiction. How
Yeah.
have you found it useful for yourself? And honestly, if I could share too, for college or my master's degree rather, I had to go to an AA meeting, an open meeting to and write a report on it basically, just because we were trying to understand addiction. And I went to this meeting and there was this one guy. There were like a few speakers, but one of them really, I don't know, spoke to my soul or something. He was a Catholic priest trained in the Vatican, for years, and he was like a really bad alcoholic, like to the point where like he said the story, he would drink a 5-ounce cup of gin in the morning and then a second cup. Like literally he would wake up to drinking 10 ounces of gin. And it was so bad, he ended up in the hospital, almost dead a few times. And this one time, like he was really about to die. And he was like, somehow, if I survive this, he tells himself, I'm gonna change my life. I'm gonna do it. And I forgot exactly like how he ended up getting over it. But he mentioned he joined AA and he did, get over his addiction. And he's been 30 years sober at that point. The point where he's telling this story, and it really just blew my mind. Like riding this thing till it literally almost kills you. It probably would have killed him, and changing your life to something that had such power over you. So I'm a huge fan of 12 steps. I think it does really powerful things for people. And what I felt there was this incredible sense of like community and willpower and like humanness. I don't know how else to put it. So I'm curious, like what's your experience been like with them?
Dude, it's been pretty amazing. It's fun. It's interesting you bring up that story about the Catholic priest that you interacted with at that AA meeting. It's pretty similar with like the founder of our program and like my sponsor. I mean, he was a priest for an extended period of time, but his priesthood was, kind of rocky because I mean, he was drinking all the time. And then, when he had some physical issues that happened to him, he started like taking prescription medication. And the way he describes it is he's like, look, the doctor told him back in like 2011, he's 47 going on 13. His brain is like deteriorated. It looks like Swiss cheese. If he doesn't do something different, that's it. You know what I mean? And so he started his process of like growth and like going to AA and everything like that. And after he saw a huge transformation in his own life, one of his good friends came up to him and was like, I've seen what AA has done for you, and that's amazing, and I love that for you. But why isn't there something like that for someone like me who doesn't struggle with
Mm.
addiction, but just wants to talk about these things. And he was like, you know what? That's a very profound statement. So that's what set him on the path of like starting this program and trying to build it up over time. And what I found within myself is like when I was like in that at-risk center and everything like that, I was very against, and even slightly before and after that, I was very against the idea of group therapy because man, that's a level of vulnerability that's insane. I
Mm.
think a lot of the train of thought, a lot of what drives the negative train of thought is thinking that our problems are our own. Nobody else in the history of mankind has experienced it the way that I'm experiencing it now. And what the 12 step has told me is like, taught me is like, that's not the case. I mean, your experience may be uniquely yours in the fact that you experienced it, but there's someone out there who has experienced something similar that has
Mm.
affected them in a similar way. And if we come together, we can learn from each other. And so that's the one thing that has I've learned the most, or that's something that the 12 step has helped me with the most, is understanding that like vulnerability and being transparent isn't a bad thing. If we were having this
Mm.
conversation like 5, 6 years ago, it would have been, I would have had way more curt answers because there would have still been so much shame around, wow, I experienced these things, you know what I mean? And I made some poor
Yeah.
decisions that led me to places I didn't really want to be. But in being in the program, what I've learned is that no, we made poor decisions and we had attitudes that caused us to, you know, commit wrong actions. But at the same time, just because we experienced that and that's how we live doesn't mean that that's who we are. We were that
Mm.
way because of the way that we thought. And now that we're at a place of understanding, we can have grace for ourselves and forgiveness for ourselves and basically go, you know what? I understand that that's how that was. And I'm actively working to make sure that it's never that again, you know? But that can only happen once we accept that those things happened and forgive all the people that maybe were a part of that, you know? Because look, even if you're the best, you know, sibling in the world, the best parent in the world, some type of trauma is going to be passed on. It's almost inevitable. I mean, I could be wrong in that, but in every situation I've seen, it's almost inevitable. And I think having the understanding that that is the case, the desire to be viewed perfectly and the desire to be perfect pretty much evaporates because we understand, you know what, it's not going to happen that way. I'm just going to do the best I can with the knowledge that I have now and work to continually peel back the layers of myself so I can be the best person I can be, not only for myself, but for the people that care about me the most.
Wow. Honestly, I've been getting chills to your whole,
Oh,
for this whole response here, but like, I'm so curious to understand where that recognition of, you're only human, right? Like you're allowed to have made those mistakes, right? And other people around you are allowed to have made those mistakes, and it's like you could forgive them. That's such a hard place to come to, and I'm sure it was such a process. But like, what really like you're mentioning like these 12 steps, and you're mentioning this kind of like almost mini revelation that you had at that point when you were 19. But I'm curious, like, what really shifted your mind to start being open and having that vulnerability, and unpack these things, because that's such a tough thing to even get started.
I think the biggest moment was actually kind of a moment out of spite, funnily enough.
Mm.
I was in, so basically I had, you know, taken a bunch of my, prescription medication that I was on and ended up, you know, I got hit with the serotonin syndrome, had a seizure and ended
Oh
up in
well.
the hospital. You know what I'm saying? And so from what I was told, because I was in and out this whole time, ambulance came to our house, picked me up, drove us to the hospital, and I remember waking up in the hospital. And I remember I was like there, and it was weird because I was like, okay, you know, I'm gonna be able to just go back home and do whatever, you know, basically life goes on. And I remember asking the nurse, like, hey, when am I gonna go home? And she's like, you're not. You're going to a place where pretty much indefinitely until you figure it out, you're gonna be there. And so
Mm.
I remember I went, hated it. It was not, it wasn't a place that at the time I felt I needed to be. Looking back, I think I should have been there longer. Honestly, I was only there for a week because I basically started, you know, oh, I'm completely saved. I'm put back together, guys. You can let me out now. Please sign the paper to let me go home. But I remember the moment that really like kicked it into gear was there was this girl in there because it was all teens. It was like 13 to 17 years old. That was the group. There was about 20 of us in there. I remember we would have like little group therapy sessions every single day, and I remember she said, you know, like right as I had found out, oh yeah, we're gonna let you go home. And the funny thing about it was the psychiatrist straight up told me to my face, she was like, you know, honestly, I think you're faking it. And I was like, ah, crap. Is she on to me? She's like, I think you're faking it, but I'm going to trust the people that work here in saying that you're rehabilitated. And I'm going to sign this paper to let you leave. And I remember I got that news. We were sitting in there, and, you know, the person who was leading our group therapy was like, hey, so you're getting out. Is there anything that, you know, you taking with you? Da, da. And I was like, yeah, you know, I feel like my, you know, BS to answer. But there was a lot of truth in it, in the fact that I was like, oh, yeah, you know, I feel like I've learned a lot and I'm going to not be here again. And I remember randomly one of the girls across the room that was her fourth time in there. She was like, yeah, well, you know, everyone feels that way. You know, everyone feels like you're not gonna be back here, but I felt that way every single time, and this is my fourth time. And I remember feeling in the moment, I'm like, man, what are you talking about, dude? I'm not gonna be back here. And there was almost like a fire, like internally, of like, I don't care what it takes. I'm not gonna be back here. I'm really not gonna be back here. This is a one stop. This is not a, hey, you know, we're coming right back and we're going through the same process. Because honestly, the process of like getting admitted into the center, and like just everything around it, the environment, the sense of you know, the sense of just like angst that was in the air constantly. You know, there was no outlets, no nothing. It was just, I basically knew I'm never coming back to this place again, and that was in a lot of ways the start of, hey, we're getting this ball rolling and trying different things. And I remember it was like I got out. First thing I ate was Chipotle because the food in there was terrible. I was like, Mom, can you please take me to Chipotle? And you know, some months later, I had a really good friend of mine pass away. Like, he literally passed in a car accident, like probably
Mm,
400 feet away from my house. Like, not even that far. It was almost like too close for comfort. And
mm,
I remember that happening, and there was a desire to almost go back to the way that I was existing previously, but there was something that was like, no, you said you weren't going to go back to that spot. If you go down the road that you'd already been on, you're going to go back there, you're going to see the same nurses, and you may even see some of the same people because they're probably still in there. I mean, it had only been like 2-3 months since that had happened. And so that being the catalyst, I just started making these very small decisions that I didn't even really understand were decisions at the time. Like, after that friend of mine passed, I had a mutual friend that I had known for a while, known him through band camp and whatnot. We were juniors in high school at the time. He had recently dropped out
mm,
because he was addicted to Xanax, but was just working on music all the time. And I remember he hit me up. He was like, yo, man, saw you at the funeral. We talked briefly. He was like, would you want to make some music? And I hadn't been working on music for years at this point. It was something that always brought me joy, but I had gotten so deep into where I was at that I stopped. And, you know, him and I just literally, I was, at first it was, yeah, let's work on music after school. But then I was like, yeah, I'm going to go to first period so they get my name on the attendance, and then we're going to skip and start going and working on music. But that's a whole other story. Basically, being in that at risk center was kind of like the catalyst, and especially hearing the girls say,
mm,
oh yeah, you're going to be back. That was the catalyst of like, nah, we're going to figure something out. I don't know what it's going to be, but we're going to figure something out. And I think as time has gone on, the more positive feedback that has come through like better decisions, that's pretty much just reinforced the desire to
mm.
stay on the right track. Because I think no matter how deep into positivity you get, there will be times where life is almost asking you to backslide, but it's a choice. And I think that's the one thing I'm most grateful for now at 26 years old, is understanding that all of these things are like, those decisions are a choice. Like, this not like
Mm.
I just have to do them because they're in front of me. I get to choose whether or not I want to, and I have the autonomy. I get to have the autonomy to make those choices. So yeah, that was a
Wow.
long-winded way of saying yes. That was kind of like the moment that was like, yeah, I need to move in a different
Yeah.
direction.
What I find so powerful is that you've been tested. And I think people, I could speak for myself. Like, I think sometimes, I decide I'll only do it when I'm in the mood or something. And it's not really a real decision. It's not really a real commitment. Like, what you're made out of, who you are is like when it's hard, right?
Hmm.
Like, are you doing it anyways?
Yeah.
And that's so
And
powerful, you
and
know?
honestly too, like I think about it, a lot of my attitude now is just like things don't really bother me if I'm being honest. Um,
Mm.
if they do, I talk about them. Otherwise, it's like it's really not that deep. And I think a lot of that is because, like, for better or worse, I don't think I've encountered a situation as an adult that's been as difficult as basically my time growing up. If I'm being honest, it's like as much as it sucked to live that way and exist that way for an extended period of time. I'm so grateful for it because it gave me the understanding that, you know what, it's just great to be here. Like if I'm feeling if I'm feeling it, whether it's anxiety or like extreme happiness or just like whatever it is, that's a blessing. Like I get to feel that. I'm alive to feel that. I'm in existence, feel that I have full like, use of all of like my hands, my feet, like I can speak. Like it's just helped me in the 12-step program basically helped put it into words. It helped me just develop an attitude of gratitude because
Mm.
ultimately I can't take anything for granted. You can be here one day, gone tomorrow. Like being grateful for everything has just brought so much more happiness into my life. And so I just try to operate that way every day. You know what I mean?
Wow. Yeah. I love that reframing of being grateful even for your pain and tough times, because you had a hard childhood, really difficult. It's like I could only imagine questioning every day from that age, of like why you're here and there not being any reason for you or anything. And then being an adult, being able to look at that as an asset of like, hey, nothing is as difficult as anything I went through. So just be grateful for that. It's profound. It's profound, and I'm curious, like, it's easier said than done, I think, because we all know, like, we all know things could be a million times worse. We all know that, like, there's people literally right now living in all sorts of terrible conditions, and we're not there. And I think almost we like, when we think about it, even within our own lives, like, I complain about problems all the time, but it's like, I know for a fact if I ever get to 70, I will wish, I will wish that I would be back here at my
Hell
age
yeah.
now, you know, give anything for that. And it's like, you know, I still complain, I still find things, and I think we all do. It's like part of the human condition. So I'm curious, like, how are you able to focus on that gratitude and embody it personally so that you're not kind of dwelling on that negativity?
Honestly, I think the big thing is been coming to realize that, in the culture that we grew up in here in the US, you know, true happiness is seen as having over $1 billion in assets. It's having big house, big cars, like just everything from a material standpoint. But as time goes on, I'm realizing that like true wealth is emotional equilibrium, just being at a place where you can just basically regulate your own emotions and be in a solid headspace despite what's going on. It doesn't matter what's going
Mm.
on. It's easy to have emotional equilibrium when, wow, I just got a raise, things are going well, but get a flat tire, lose a job, have bills pile up, lose a friend, and that's where we find out where the emotional equilibrium comes from. You know what I mean? Like where does it exist? And I think like that's the thing that's kept me like going in a state of gratitude is kind of just understanding that, you know what? First of all, it could be worse. I've experienced worse, but also like what kind of message am I trying to send out to the world? What kind of message am I trying to send out to the people around me? Like is it a message of like faith and perseverance, or is it a message of, oh, well, nothing matters? Because if you believe nothing matters, then nothing matters. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
that's almost kind of the way that I feel like the world works. But if you believe that things can get better, normally they do, because in a weird internal way, when I say, "Oh, I'm capable of doing this," I start operating as if I'm capable of doing it, which means I get more
Mhm.
opportunities to become more capable of doing it. And as long as I stay humble and grateful, then that kind of just continues to like grow and grow. I mean, in sports they say it's what's it? They call it being coachable. You know what I mean? Basically being able to like receive information and go, you know what? We can just keep growing from here. So I feel like what keeps me grateful is understanding that that's where the true wealth is, being able to see the positive in anything, but also be able to see the real and understand that it doesn't have to change our emotional state. That's where the true wealth is. And that's what I'm pursuing, is that just state of zen, emotional equilibrium, nirvana, whatever you want to call it, you know what I mean, in the physical form.
Wow, dude. Yeah, this leads me to ask you about, you mentioned enlightenment, or a little bit earlier. You mentioned, maybe a divine voice or calling. I forgot exactly how you put it, and I'm curious, like, you're chasing this mindset, and I'm wondering if you feel, or like what you feel God's role in your life, or whatever you want to call it, like the universe's role,
Mhm.
um, and like how you've maybe seen that in your life and how that influences your art.
So I'd say the big thing is like the 12-step program helped me put a name to it. They could in the program we call it higher power. And now it's on step 3. Basically you formulate what your higher power is. What do they look like? What do they say? What are their beliefs? You know what I mean? And the reason why you put that together is because okay, now that's the map of who you want to be. You know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
I think oftentimes it's easy to go, okay, this omnipotent being exists and I have no part in it. But I think once we put ourselves in a place of understanding that I will never be omnipotent, I'm a limited creature by just design. Um, but I can still strive to walk the way that my higher power walks. It almost puts us into a different headspace of like, yes, I'm human, but I can become the best human that I can within the confines. I think how it shows up in music is understanding that, well, music and life is understanding that there's a limited amount of things that I control. Worrying about the things that I can't control just isn't helpful to anybody, to myself, to the process, to people around me. Now that isn't to say that, you know, I never complain. That would be disingenuous. I do complain, you know what I mean? But I think the big difference between now and before was like I'm complaining while moving instead of complaining and using that as an excuse as to why I'm basically using that as an excuse as to why I don't control anything when that's not the case. The things I control are what I do with my time, how much effort I give, and my attitude while doing the rest of those things. And so it's made music much easier to traverse because music is like and unlike a lot of industries in the fact that it's very volatile. It changes all the time. But if I sit down, do my daily routine of just trying to write. Some days I don't write anything. Some days I write things and it's absolute garbage. And then other days you sit down and it's like, wow, like this feels true. This feels honest. You know what I mean? It's like
Mm.
understanding that that's the only thing I can control in the whole process. I feel like all of my emotional energy, instead of being spread out across all these things that I have no control over, is now being concentrated into the things I do, which almost just creates results in a level of contentment that I think is hard to put into words because it's like instead of focusing on, you know, this, that, whatever it is, I just took the small plot of land that I actually exist on and did the best that I could with it. And
Mm.
now we're planting seeds and we're cultivating the soil and things are growing. And so as time is going on, it's just kind of like continue to reinforce, just focus on what you can control, focus on what you can control. And everything past that, a higher power, the universe, whoever you believe in, God, will take care of the rest as long as I'm doing my part to become ready for whatever is coming. You know what I mean?
So kind of like you maximizing your own potential to the best that you can, and then having faith that, that these things will work out, or just how it's supposed to be, you know?
Yeah. Because honestly, it's like one of my favorite quotes I heard recently was like, when you relinquish control, you realize you never had control. You just had anxiety, you know? Um, I
Yeah.
think the desire to control things is such an innately human thing, but it's like, I don't control much of anything.
Mm.
I can't make the world move in a different direction. And I think the sooner I separated my sense of self or my sense of self-worth from that, the happier I became, because it was like, I'm not looking to be something that I'm not. That would be a God. That would be a higher power. That would be whoever you believe in. You know what I mean? And that's not my role. If I was meant to be that, I would be that. I'm who I am. So let me just do the best within the confines of
Right.
what I am.
That's fascinating. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, for sure.
If you would ask yourself, or if you maybe do still ask yourself why you're here, what comes up for you now?
I'm here to communicate. That's it. Communicate, not just verbally, but also, you know, through my actions. Um, when we're out at a restaurant, I try to make sure I like, hey, I appreciate you to the waiter, or like, hey, how's your day going? Just communicate positivity to other people, because you never know. I mean, sometimes sometimes me communicating with the waiter or waitress that way will inspire someone else who's at the table to do that to somebody else, which means that we're just spreading a certain level of like self-awareness and understanding that we're all in this together. So that's what I'm here to
Mm.
do. I'm here to communicate. Music's the art form right now. Who knows how else I'll communicate in the future, but that's what I'm here to do.
Like you mentioned communicating positivity, but I'm curious, like, do you have maybe a clearer message or idea, or is it just like, yo, life is amazing. Let's enjoy that.
I think the big thing is like, if I had to put it down in one word, I would say well, I mean, openness. Openness. Try to communicate I try to communicate with a sense of openness, and what I mean by that is like, it's very easy to learn a certain amount of information or be taught a certain amount of information and go, okay, this is all that I need for life. But that's not the case. I think if we were all more open, if we were all more open, that would lead to us being more accepting and lead to us moving forward more as a society. Because then I would understand that my position is one position of millions, billions of different positions that exist. So if there's some way that I can like transmit that idea to others through conversations about like, well, this is what openness looks like to me, then hey, maybe that inspires someone else to go, you know what, maybe I need to be more open to trying new things. Because one of my life philosophies for the last couple of years is basically like, my favorite thing is something I haven't tried yet. You know what I mean? I performed last year. I had social anxiety for the longest time. Performed last year, and I was like, wow, I really enjoy performing. But if
Yeah,
I operated within the mindset of like, well, these conditions that I exist in are static, and this is the only thing that I will ever be, I would have never performed, and I would have never enjoyed it, because I would have told myself, hey, that's not you. Well, me is a changing thing. And so I hope to communicate that to other people, that like, if you're in a good space, you can be in a different good space, and it'll be equally
yeah,
as good, possibly even better. If you're in a bad space, you can get to a better space, but only if we're
yeah.
open to it.
We're evolving. If
Exactly.
if we're open to it, like it'll work out.
Oh yeah.
So I'm curious. I want to change topics a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think? As somebody like you've thought about this deeply, I'm sure, and you mentioned like almost that life is seems like some type of video game. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, what do you think reality is? Like, why are people here? What's going on? Like, what is this bizarre thing?
Man, there's so many different like, I don't know if it was Plato, Aristotle, or Socrates that said it. I mean, you would know better than I would. The
Maybe.
allegory, not the allegory of the cave, although that's applicable here. Uh,
Yeah.
I think it was Confucius that said something about when you go to sleep, are you a man dreaming of being a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming of being a man? I think it's like, what reality is so complex, strange, hard to quantify, that I almost believe that we're here just for the sole purpose of just progression, whatever progression looks like. I think that's the purpose of reality.
Yeah.
I mean, in a video game, that's what it is. You level up, you play, the more you play, the better you get. I think that's really what it is. It's just progression. That is reality.
There's something in us that calls to progress. Did you ever watch the anime Gurren Lagann?
No.
Dude, it's so good. It's I don't know if you enjoy anime, but like
Oh, love it. Yeah.
basically, yeah, dude, you would love this one. It's very short. It's maybe like I want to say like 30 episodes,
Hmm.
but one of the core themes is this idea of spiral power, and it's this force that constantly drives evolution. It drives people to just go forward, move forward, do something great. Really powerful anime. I don't want to spoil it for you, but yeah, it seems like there's something within us that like just needs to like experience this for some reason, and it's so interesting. I've been thinking about it very deeply. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on like altered states of consciousness, or like I don't want to ask you if you've had those types of experiences, but I feel like there's altered states of consciousness because of psychedelics, which
Hmm.
personally I have done, which
Hmm.
is powerful and interesting. And then there's also just like I've even had these kinds of states without psychedelics, and it sounds like you've had them too, of something just calling you or speaking to you, something that feels so real, like almost a transcendent experience, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny you bring up psychedelics. During that time, like 17 to 19, that was when I was introduced to like, LSD, did shrooms a couple of well, did LSD more than I did shrooms. Shrooms didn't come till like much later, but honestly, weed was kind of like my first foray into it. But I remember when I
Mm,
took LSD for the first time, that was really when I understood like the brain is a powerful machine. It
mm,
obviously, we look at it and it's a solid piece. It's like it's pink, it's weird looking, you know what I mean? And as much as we try to like investigate the tactile and go, oh, this is what consciousness is, this is what, understanding is, we still haven't been able to nail that down, because I think that whatever we are, whatever who we are, whatever makes us who we are, is just being reflected on this plane from somewhere
mm.
completely different. You know what I mean? And I remember when I took acid, that was something that like really opened my mind up. I was like, because it alters the state of time, which by itself showed me that time is a construct, but it also basically allowed me to think on a deeper level about I'm here for some reason. I have thoughts that other people have had too, which means that my thoughts are not my own, which is kind of strange, because I think, especially with the culture we grow up in, everything needs to be given a title, everything needs to be, put into a box. I don't think higher states of consciousness can ever be put into a box, at least in the way that we understand a box. Um, there's that movie. It's funny. The first time I ever saw it, I was on shrooms. Interstellar.
Oh yeah.
I think the wildest part about that movie was like it took that idea of higher states of consciousness and kind of like threw it, put it through the lens of like science with like higher dimensions and being able to interact with
Mhm.
time as a physical plane and all this type of stuff. But basically, yeah, I think when it comes to anything higher than what we're currently existing at, I hope it may not be feasible, maybe too far in the future, but I hope to see one day us break through that wall and go, wow, we discovered where spirituality comes from, or we started to develop a deeper understanding of like this may be what a god is, you know what I mean? And I don't know if I'll ever see it in my lifetime, but I hope, even if it's just the beginning of it.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope so too. And it's scary too, honestly, because it's like if there is something that exists beyond, it's so unknown, right? And
Hell
it's
yeah.
like, yeah, you can only hope it's good.
Hmm.
Bim, I've been really enjoying talking to you, man.
Dude, ditto. This has been fun. A lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I'm curious, do you have advice for aspiring artists?
There's a quote from the woman that mentored Quincy Jones when he initially got into the music industry. Your music, or it's more so art, but say it's just music, your music will never be greater or less than the person that you are at the time that you make it. Um,
Mm,
I'll say to any aspiring creative, with the current market, with the way that social media works, there's always a desire to reach externally, and that's important. But however much effort you put in the external, put 7 to 10 times as much effort into the internal, because you'd be so surprised at how peeling back the layers within ourselves actually reveals the creative that was always there, but maybe life, maybe society, maybe people in our immediate circle told us wasn't meant to exist. You know what I mean? So, to any young creative, look internally, dig deep, think about what you're actually trying to talk about, and understand that the more refined your internal vision becomes, everything else kind of just works itself out because you're living authentically and you're living true. And that's all that really matters.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Honestly, I'm curious about your journey. Like, what do you feel? You mentioned the Catholic priest that you met and
Yeah.
spoke to during your time, like visiting an AA meeting. Has there been anything else that's happened in your career, in the mental health field that has changed the way that you thought about a lot of things, like a super profound moment for you?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. I think oh, thank you for asking me also, but, when I was 19, I've never, like, talked about what it was publicly before. I don't think I've ever spoke actually, no, I brought it up in one other podcast, but, like, when I was 19, I was having really bad intrusive thoughts, like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, I'm a loser, nothing I do will ever matter," "I'm an idiot," like, all sorts of really negative, bad, intrusive thoughts like that, and it would really bother me,
Mm-hmm.
and this was at a time when I was doing something that was extremely difficult for me. Like, I decided to take on a certain challenge, and it was very hard for me to do. I don't know, I feel like I don't know if I should, like, mention it. Are you familiar with NoFap?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I was doing NoFap at the time, and, from 18 I started at towards the end of being 18, so 3 months into this, where I was doing this and I was successful at it, I was having these really bad intrusive thoughts, like,
Mm-hmm.
"I'm a loser, it doesn't matter, my accomplishment doesn't matter." And I literally, for the life of me, I didn't understand it because I
Mm-hmm.
was like, until that point, this was something that I considered impossible to do, really impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And it took so much willpower, so much strength, and like putting my mindset like where it needed to be able to accomplish this.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't understand where it was coming from. And I talked to my therapist, um, awesome guy, love him so much. But I was telling him about this, and I was like, "This is so strange. I don't understand why I'm going through this." And he said, "You know, throughout your life, you've internalized different messages from people wherever you've heard it, like society, parents, school, who knows where it came from. These messages have been internalized in your head, and now you're doing this thing that you so strongly believe that you have to be the opposite of all those negative messages that you've received, that now all those negative messages are coming to the surface." He kind of gave this analogy, like, imagine if you have a rope in a pool that's
Mm-hmm.
very loose, so it's under the pool, you don't see it. But now if you start tightening the rope starts to surface and becomes visible in the water. But if you keep going, it's going to snap. That's the analogy he gave. And that was a conversation and that was interesting. But this is the thing that really blew my mind. I would consider this probably like my first transcendent experience. I was watching a YouTube video about a meditation, just for dealing with, I don't even remember the title, but it was something like, I don't know, how to deal with, maybe like how to be happy or how to deal with intrusive thoughts. I can't remember exactly. But basically the meditation was he's like, okay, sit down, find a comfortable seat, start taking some deep breaths and start, with your eyes closed, start imagining like, where you feel yourself, feel where you feel yourself. And I was like, okay, I could feel myself by my face. And he's like, okay, most people, yeah, that's where they feel it. So imagine you start going back, right? And you're looking at your head from a distance and you go all the way back to the base of your spine. And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like a slow meditation. Like imagine it going deeper, deeper, and now you're looking up at your head.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, all you need to do is just observe. Let the thoughts go. Let yourself, feel whatever's coming up and just observe it. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting there and I start like hearing the thoughts again. And I'm like, okay, I'm not interrupting them. I'm not engaging with them. I'm just listening to those thoughts and I'm hearing those intrusive thoughts come up. And I'm just observing them. And then he asked this question that really, it cracked my mind. He's like, if you're the one observing the thoughts, then who's thinking them? And I don't yeah, in that moment, my something in my mind, it just snapped where I realized for the first time, I was like, "Holy crap, like, I'm not my thoughts." I thought my whole life that these thoughts that are playing in my head, like they're me, they're coming from me. I was thinking I'm an idiot. I was thinking I'm not good enough or whatever. I was like, holy crap, it's not from me at all. It's not my thoughts at all. It's like it's coming from my head. It's playing from somewhere, but it's like it's not me. Does that make sense?
Oh, it definitely does. In the 12-step program, we call those tapes, and the one that tells us we're not good enough is like the accuser.
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's interesting
So
to put a name to it like that. Yeah.
so now that you're like having that experience, do you feel like what is your, because obviously you were doing something that was uh completely opposite to the way that you had been existing before. I commend you on that, by the way. Want to
Thank you.
make sure I say congrats on like going through that process, because it's a very difficult process. Um,
Yeah.
what does your middle ground look like now? Because obviously you are operating on extremes. Like, what does your current middle ground look like?
With regards to that mindset.
Yeah,
Yeah. Honestly, it's so funny. Since that point, I've done psychedelics, I've done ayahuasca, and I just want to say, talking about psychedelics, there is a lot of talk about how positive it is, and it certainly has helped a lot of people and can be very healing experience.
yeah.
But it needs to be done responsibly.
Oh,
It absolutely
100%.
needs to be done responsibly. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it could be harmful if done in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
But um, yeah, so I've done psychedelics since then. My mindset, it's so funny, man. Like I believe we're all this infinite, like we're an expression of infinity. Like we're part of God, we're part of nature, we're part of whatever this whole thing is.
Mm-hmm.
We're connected to it deeply. Like that is ultimately what we are. Like we're kind of like, this isn't my analogy, but other people have given this analogy. It's kind of like, you could imagine if like the tips of our fingers are like individuals, we're just concealed from like
Mm-hmm.
recognizing we're part of this whole thing. Like we think of ourselves as autonomous or individual, but we're really like this infinite thing. I don't know what's going on, but it's something. And yeah. But it's so funny. I could recognize that, and I genuinely believe that. Like in that sense, I guess you would call me a mystic or something. But dude, and I believe everything. Everything is part of it.
Oh
Like
yeah.
when I get a parking ticket, that's a part of that. And it still kind of pisses me off when I get one. It's still just like yeah. I think that's part of the experience. Part of the experience is like we're here to be human. Being annoyed is part of that. Forgetting that we're part of the infinite's part of that. What my middle ground is, it's hard to really say. I don't know. I'm still figuring it out, I guess.
Oh yeah. True human being right there. Just constantly. What's it?
Yeah. How about you, man?
Shoot. I feel like it's the same. Honestly, we have a guy in our group who is a musician as well, older guy, he's been around for a long time, and one thing that he always reiterates is like he's like I'm forever a work in progress, and I definitely, when he said it the first time, I really like resonated with that. And I think that's where the middle ground looks is I think when you go through the extremes of like negativity and positivity, um I feel like what those two things help me understand is that where I'm at is somewhere in the middle, and the middle changes as the extremes change. You know what I mean? It's like there's
Mm,
ways I can get better, but there's also ways that I need to make sure I'm patting myself on the back for. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And in the program, we call it being right sized. Um, not having too big of an ego, but also not like shrinking ourselves. So I think that's what the middle ground looks like. Is basically just like I said before, operating with a state of openness, understanding that my experiences are valid, but my philosophy can also be changed and augmented as I speak to more people and just learn different things.
Being able to be open and receive and be flexible. So powerful.
Yeah.
Bim, where can people find you?
Shoot, you can find me on Instagram, really any social media platform, at I am Bayem. It's a IAM BAYEM. You can find me on Spotify, Apple Music, pretty much any streaming platform as well, at BAYEM. Yeah, I just put out a project not too long ago titled Tape 3. That was end of last year being 2024, in case someone is watching in the distant future. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, that's where you can find me.
nice. Is it Bayem?
Honestly, it's funny. So it's supposed to be Bayem, But growing up
Mm.
in Indiana, you know, a lot of people have accents. So I remember being a little kid getting into public school, and it's like, "What's your name?" Bayem. It's like, "What? Bayem? What? Bayem? Oh, Bayem. Yeah, yeah. I like Bayem. That's a good one." So pretty much, it's been that. I mean, I respond to whatever, man. B Bayem, Bayem. I mean, bro. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's just, it's a sound you make
Yeah.
if you want my attention. So I'll give you the attention, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Dude, but I love
yeah.
Bayem actually. That's very like it's exotic almost, you know?
Yeah, it's a tribal name. It's a tribal name. When my
Oh, interesting.
yeah, when my parents were looking to name myself and my younger siblings, they contacted my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, the one from Cameroon. He's from a very small tribe in northern Cameroon called the Bassa tribe, and he basically they asked him like, "Hey, can we get like the language book so we can put names together?" And so they put my name and then my siblings' names together from that language book, and Bayem means the one that does good unto others. So I try to like live up to
Mm,
that name.
that's so brilliant.
Bro.
Actually, I feel bad doing this, but I do want to ask you
Yeah.
before we wrap up though, do you have any insight on you mentioned earlier also before we started recording, I think that your mom is German. I'm curious
Yeah.
like how your mixed race how that's kind of like influenced you and like how you see race and culture.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. It's really actually it's really interesting you bring that up. I feel like my experience growing up, I was always kind of like close enough but outside. You know what I mean? My
Mm,
dad is, I mean, at least to my knowledge, he's fully black. You know what I mean? So operating in black spaces, there's no real barrier there, if that makes any sense. When I go to Germany, my mom is mixed, but is much deeper entrenched in the German culture. So although I felt connected to it, there's still almost like a barrier. So I felt like in every space that I operated in, I almost kind of had to be willing to kind of go with the flow, because there wasn't like a, okay, here's where all the black Germans that grew up in Indiana, this is where they hang out, you know what I mean? And this is like, because I do think that it is important to have like those cultural connective points. So I definitely did, but maybe not to the full extent that a lot of other people did. So I feel like growing up the way that I did, it set me up really well to be able to pretty much be cool with anybody, because I was always kind of a bit of an outlier, you know what I mean? Obviously, we have people that I grew up with who are also black Germans, but even in that, they're from different parts of the state, some of them different parts of the country. So it's not like we have one unified shared experience amongst ourselves that is like, oh yeah, well, you know, this is what we ate growing up, and this is what we did. But yeah, I definitely feel like as a mixed race person, I kind of grew up around a little bit of everybody. So I'm thankful for that though, because growing up with a German mindset and like a black American mindset in the same house, it taught me that like, no, things can be very different, but also have like a very similar result. Because obviously my parents think very differently because of their backgrounds, but they've been together for what, almost 30 years now, and then raised a family, did all this stuff. So different viewpoints can always come together and make something unified. So that's the one thing I really took away from it.
it's fascinating. What do you wish people knew about mixed race or just your experience about being mixed race?
It's really a conversation that I feel like is always happened, but is happening more and more now in like mainstream media. I remember growing up, there was a lot of times where it was like there was almost this pressure to like identify as one thing. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm,
well, are you black? Oh, I'm black German. Yeah, so you're black. It's like, nah, I'm black German, because the German aspect is as important to me as the black part is. Like, you wouldn't get who I am today if it wasn't for both of those parts. So when I go to
mm.
Germany, I'm a German. You know what I mean? These are my people too. And so I think that's one thing I wish we would have more of a conversation about. There's people who definitely, there's people I grew up around who are mixed as well, who are like, yeah, I am black. That's how I identify. And I think that's amazing. But I think we should keep the door open and understand that like when we're having certain like racial conversations or ethnic conversations about, oh, this group of people is this way. I'm like, well, I have cousins that are that group of people as well. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I can, like, does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, 100%.
that the whole scope is important, and asking me to identify as one thing, I think, is doing more harm than good, basically.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's bizarre. And I think it goes so against what we were talking about earlier, where we're all humans. We're
Mm-hmm.
all, there's something else underneath. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why there's such a need for labels. Like, for example, my parents are from Uzbekistan, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm Central Asian. I think it's so funny. Like, a lot of people think I'm white, and then people that also know me like know that I'm not white, and they treat me. It's funny. I've like seen it growing up where
Yeah.
I get treated differently by different people.
Mm-hmm.
But my wife is she's Ashkenaz Jewish, so she's like European. So
Mm-hmm.
it's funny. My kid is mixed race.
Do you feel like when you were
Hmm.
growing up, like, as a Uzbek Jew, is that correct? Uzbek Jew?
It's called Bukharian. Is the name
Bukharian?
of the what they would call a Jewish person from Uzbekistan or Central Asia in general.
Well,
Yeah,
growing up as a Bukhari individual, is that how we would say it?
yeah,
Yeah.
good enough. Yeah,
So growing up that way, do you feel like people ever tried to put you in a box? Because I mean, obviously,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Yes, 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 yes. In Queens, there's a big Bukharian community in Queens, New York.
Hmm.
And then two other pretty big ones, one in Arizona and one in Israel.
Hmm.
But the majority of Bukharians live in New York, and especially being around other types of Jewish people like Ashkenazim, there's certain like impressions of what a Bukharian person is like, and not always flattering.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And I've had to deal with that a lot in Queens, and it's complicated, dude. Even in my wife's family, like I hate to say this, I don't want to like tattletale on them or anything, but I have to deal with prejudice all the time.
Hmm. So is it one of those? That was actually going to be my next question. Is like, do you feel like it's people who are not Jewish that almost that you feel more prejudice from, or do you feel like it's more people who are Jewish that you feel more prejudice from?
Yeah, that's a great question. It happens to be I don't I think a lot of not Jewish people, they don't know the difference between Bukharian or Ashkenaz. Like, they'll just look at me, and if they think I'm Jewish, they'll just see like, "Oh, he's just a Jewish person."
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, throughout my life, I haven't dealt so much with anti-Semitism, a little bit here and there, but it personally hasn't affected me,
Mm-hmm.
thank God. But, living in New York is pretty diverse. And again, like, there are people that I know that have had pretty bad experiences, but to me, it hasn't been so much of an issue. But
Mm-hmm.
in the Jewish circles, people will know the difference. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if they know you're Bahrain. So I've had to deal with that a lot. And I went to Ashkenaz high school. So for those that don't know, they're like Judaism, whatever, broadly, just for the sake of the conversation, there are like two types. There's Ashkenaz Jews, which are Jews that lived in Europe primarily. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have Sephardi Jews, which are Jews from North Africa and Asia and like, yeah, Central Asia and beyond. So obviously it's more complicated than that. But oh, this is amazing. Do you know Ari Shafir?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Dude, yeah,
Comedian, right?
he's a comedian.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's hilarious.
yeah.
So he has this special called Jew, and he
Okay.
has this joke. Yeah, he has this joke in a special about how Ashkenazi Jews see Sephardim, and he just basically goes like, "Oh, so the way Ashkenazim see Sephardim, they're animals." It's like
Really?
very funny the way he does it.
Yeah.
It's not that bad, but there is unfortunately like a division. I think honestly maybe it comes from it comes from this. Yeah, I don't want to diagnose the culture, but I think it comes from, the fact that Ashkenazim in Europe, there was a lot of persecution and a lot of lines being drawn. I think that has caused a certain intergenerational trauma where there
Mm-hmm.
is much more of a tribal mentality, and it's very unfortunate because there's a lot more similarity than there is difference. And I don't want to make it sound like people hate each other or whatever, because like I said, I married an Ashkenaz person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, definitely I've had to deal with prejudice. Definitely I've had to deal with like just for example, I was on somebody else's podcast and I told them that I was Bukharian, and they said a line like, "Oh, you're the most normal Bukharian I've met," or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
this person doesn't know any Bukharians, but like just the
Mm-hmm.
impression that they have of like, oh, that's them, it's a different. And I'm sure you might like maybe hear something similar about people saying, like, in the Black community, like, where being articulate could be considered like an aggressive thing to say, and it's just so unfortunate. It's so like, um it's so sad that people have these stereotypes and prejudices, and like, because like the bias there is that Black people aren't articulate, and it's just like, and if you are, that's like such a compliment, because it's like you're different than other people, and it's so sad that people think that, you know.
Dude, it's as soon as you said that person basically told you like, oh wow, you're not like other Picarian people. It immediately made me think of like growing up. It's like you talk white. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
Totally separate, like totally different cultures, but it's like what I gleaned from that was almost like I think sometimes with like ethnic groups, there's almost whether I don't think it's a conscious thing at all. I think it's just something that happens over time. There's almost this like cultural decision of like this is what classifies a real blank, and anything outside of that you're not that. You're close, but you're not going to be treated as that. Like I know growing up it was like because I'm Black German, I'm Black but not really. Even though from a surface level, no one, unless I tell someone I'm German, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Maybe they would if they're like super attuned to the way that, like, similar to what you were talking about, like Sephardi Jews versus people like Ashkenazi Jews. To outside looking in, wouldn't be able to tell the difference, but only within the different communities are they able to go. And it's not a hatred thing. Like I know in the Black community, it's not a hatred thing, but it's like it's just an acknowledgement of like, you're not really within the code that we've culturally accepted to be. Like we'll give you the label because you're close, but it's like a label with like the edge pulled up so we can like kind of pull it whenever it's convenient. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm fascinated by this, and I'm curious, like, if you think talking about this will help people kind of open their minds and realize, like, people are people. There, you can't just draw lines.
Yeah.
Like, it's funny, on this podcast, yeah, I called out this person. I was like, that's really racist to say something like that.
Hell yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Dude, and honestly, like, I mean, you don't need me to tell, but good on you for pointing that out, because one thing, it's a conversation I've had with my dad a lot, you know what I mean? Because Indiana was, I mean, it's one of the lesser talked about like super racist states historically, you know what I mean? You know, one of our like less than desirable nicknames is like it's the northernmost southern state. You see the way like Alabama and Mississippi operate, Indiana operates in a lot of the same ways. So my dad growing up, when he's walking to school, if there's a truck full of like white dudes, they're hailing the N-word at him, you know what I mean? Him and his siblings. So his entire viewpoint is very separate from mine. Like his life experiences are very real and very valid. But it's funny, I told him, I was like, in marrying a German woman and having like mixed children, it's almost like confronting like interracial conflict in a very like direct way, you know what I mean? In me saying that, it was a great thing that you called that person out on their racism. I find in my conversations with my dad and even that side of the family that sometimes comments like that are so normalized that it isn't until someone goes, hey, that's racist, that the person goes, wait a minute. I've always said this around people who were from my same background and no one ever checked me on it. So this person saying it is almost like, wow, have I been racist this whole time and I didn't even really think about it? Because I think a lot of times racism wouldn't even be looked at. Racism isn't looked at as racism unless it's like someone like myself to you or yourself to me. When it's like, nah, we're still very tribal. It can even be broken down like, shoot, in the city I'm from, it can be broken down like, oh, you're from the north side, so you're not really like, you're Black, but you're not really black. Only the east side and the west side guys are really, you know what I mean? It's like it can be broken down to such a almost a neighborhood to neighborhood type of thing. So
interesting. Yeah.
I think having these conversations is important because it shows that this sense of tribalism is one that is like, it goes down to the nitty gritty. So it's not it's a human thing. It's something that we just need to work past as humans because we are naturally tribal. We want to group ourselves, but for us to be happy on the large scale, I think we need to push past that a little bit.
We absolutely do.
Mhm.
It's such wise words. And this is my final question I ask all the guests.
Yeah.
If there were something that you would be able to yell from the rooftops, that if everyone were listening to, what would you want everyone to know?
Seek out your own understanding.
Hmm.
Don't just listen to what someone else told you. I mean, you can take it into account when you're formulating your own understanding, but ask your own questions, have your own conversations, develop your own understanding. I think we'd all be better off if we had that.
It's brilliant. I think this ties so much of our conversation together where it's like people are so often just afraid to think for themselves or let themselves go deep for one reason or other.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Ben, for having the courage to speak and for coming on this podcast because it's been really amazing. And guys, definitely check out. Sorry, Bayem.
But
Check out
you're all
check
good,
out
man.
Bayem. Yeah, the links will be in the description, obviously. And dude, I'm so happy you came on the pod and that we connected.
Hey, Gabby, thanks for having me on.
Of course, man. All right, friends, that's it for this episode with Bayem. Be sure to send him some love. His links are in the description, of course. And let me know what your favorite part of this podcast was. I'm very curious to hear from you. So definitely share it in the comments. And now for the monologue part of the episode to share my thoughts on it as well as future podcast plans. First of all, I love speaking to artists. I love hearing their perspective and how what they do can somehow speak to us on a deeper level than other things in life and conversation. They are able to put things that words simply cannot express. They go beyond where basically words end. So it's always fascinating to me about where that comes from. And by M's story, it really just blows me away. Like from the time he was 7 to 17, constantly questioning his purpose in life. You know, it's incredible to see somebody who could have had that experience and taken it in such a different direction, right? In such a powerful direction and be such a voice for positivity and connection. So really incredible person. And I'm really happy I had this conversation. Like it was so lucky. Just a little behind the scenes, Bayem's like media agent guy reached out to me. His name is Michael. He's a great guy. Basically, he basically mentioned that he and Bayem checked out my podcast and they really liked it and Bayem's interested in coming on. And that was so flattering to me, like to have somebody who's an artist that is a successful, person that is just a really cool deep thinker and that he found my podcast and liked it and wanted to come on. Like it was just really, really cool and flattering. And it was so funny. Like he legitimately had checked out a few of the episodes. And it's just, I don't know why I'm so, it's probably not good for me to be like so shocked. Like what? Somebody random actually listened to my podcast and liked it. Cause like, I'm kind of expecting or hoping rather that most people that would listen to the podcast would enjoy it. But yeah, that's a little behind the scenes, and I have some really amazing episodes that I've already filmed that just need to be edited and put out, within the next month or two. I think, one of my big decisions that I made for the podcast, and I've always felt this way, but really doubling down on it, is I really want to be having conversations and focusing on conversations that I truly want to have, right? So like this conversation with Bayem was just an incredible example, right? I'm so happy I had it. And I think being able to say more and express more and interact with different professionals, right? And leaning on the fact that I'm a mental health professional, right? I am a professional and I'm an expert in the field, technically speaking. It's something that is so hard to admit because almost in so many ways, I still view myself like a child, right? And now it's like I'm a professional, I'm supposed to be a professional, but I still feel like I'm me. And I think that's maybe my strength, right? My strength is being able to take this discipline, still make it so human and relatable, and then intersect with other professionals and other career paths, such as being a creative or mysticism or whatever other topic, I'm interested in. And I've reached out to a lot of guests that I would love to have, but, we'll see if I get a response back. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Again, share your love in the comments and your feedback. Definitely subscribe if you're not already. Leave a 5-star review and share this episode with somebody that you think would enjoy it. And again, guys, as always, in closing, you are capable. Stay curious, think for yourself, and to the rebellion.